The old Valorian sat alone in the corner of the lecture hall. His name was Kethran Volis, and he was 312 cycles old. Deep scars covered his chitinous plating, marks left by weapons that no longer existed. His 4 eyes, once bright amber, had faded to a dull yellow. He watched the young students file into the room with something between sadness and fear. Yura Dan approached him carefully. She was young, barely 60 cycles, and she had never known war. She carried a recording device and a notebook filled with questions. Her professors had told her that Kethran was one of the last surviving veterans of the human front. They had also warned her that he refused most interview requests. "Elder Volis," she said, bowing her head in respect. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me." Kethran made a sound that might have been a laugh. "I agree because I am dying," he said, "and someone should know the truth before I am gone." Yura sat down across from him. The lecture hall was filling with students and academics, all eager to hear the old soldier speak. The human-Valorian War had ended 47 years ago, but it remained the most studied conflict in Dominion history. It was also the most lied about. "The official histories," Kethran began, his voice rough and tired, "tell you that the war was a strategic withdrawal. They tell you that we chose to make peace because conquest was inefficient. They tell you that humans were a worthy adversary, but nothing special." He leaned forward, and his old eyes grew sharp. "These are lies. All of them." The room fell silent. Yura activated her recording device. "I was a young officer when we first discovered humanity," Kethran continued. "They were confined to a single star system, still using primitive fusion engines for interstellar travel. Our scouts observed them for 2 cycles and concluded that they would make excellent slaves. They were strong, adaptable, and bred quickly. The High Council authorized a standard conquest operation." He paused, and something dark passed across his face. "We had conquered 37 species before humanity. None of them had resisted effectively. The Dazari surrendered after we destroyed their capital. The Vorn negotiated after we blockaded their homeworld. The Kethari joined the Dominion voluntarily after seeing our military strength. We expected humans to be the same. Perhaps they would fight for a few months, lose some colonies, and then accept their place in the Dominion." Kethran's claws scraped against the table. "We were fools." He told them about the invasion of Kepler 442b, the first human colony the Dominion attacked. It was a small world, home to perhaps 200,000 humans. The Valorian invasion force numbered 50,000 soldiers, supported by orbital bombardment platforms and atmospheric fighters. By all calculations, the conquest should have taken 3 days. "We landed at dawn," Kethran said. "The humans had no military installations, no orbital defenses, no standing army. We expected them to flee or surrender. Instead, they attacked. The first wave of Valorian soldiers walked into a killing field. The humans had spent the night digging trenches, planting explosives, and positioning shooters in the hills. They used primitive projectile weapons that the Valorians had dismissed as ineffective. But the humans did not aim for armor. They aimed for joints, eyes, and exposed flesh. They aimed for the places where Valorian bodies were weak. Within 3 hours, we had lost 2,000 soldiers," Kethran said. "Our commander ordered a tactical withdrawal to regroup. The humans followed us. They attacked our camps at night. They poisoned our water supplies. They collapsed tunnels on our reinforcement columns. They did not sleep. They did not rest. They did not stop." Yura was writing frantically. This was nothing like the official histories. Kethran described how the battle for Kepler 442b stretched from 3 days to 3 weeks. The Valorians brought more soldiers, more weapons, more ships. The humans retreated into the mountains and forests, using the terrain against the invaders. They built weapons from mining equipment. They turned farming chemicals into explosives. They taught their children to shoot. There was a moment, Catherine said quietly, when I understood that we had made a terrible mistake. We had captured a human settlement and were processing prisoners for transport. A female human, perhaps 40 cycles by their counting, broke free from her restraints. She had no weapons. She was injured and bleeding. She ran at our commander and tried to tear out his throat with her bare hands. He closed his eyes. She failed, of course. She was killed instantly. But as she died, she was smiling. She was glad to die fighting. She preferred death to slavery. And I looked around at the other prisoners, and I saw the same look in all of their eyes. They were not afraid. They were waiting for their chance to do the same thing. The Valorians eventually took Kepler-442b. It cost them 40% of their ground, forces, and 8 months of fighting. The official reports called it a victory. Catherine called it the beginning of the end. We thought we were the predators, he said. We had traveled the stars, conquered worlds, and built an empire. We believed that strength was measured in ships and weapons and soldiers. But humans taught us a different lesson. He looked around the lecture hall at the young faces watching him. Humans evolved on a death world. Their planet was covered in predators, diseases, and natural disasters. Every day of their existence was a fight for survival. They learned to hunt animals 10 times their size. They learned to survive in deserts and frozen wastelands. They learned to eat poison and drink contaminated water. And most importantly, they learned that surrender meant death. Catherine stood slowly, his old joints creaking. We did not understand this. We came from a gentle world, where evolution favored cooperation and intelligence. We had never faced a species that would choose extinction over defeat. We had never met creatures who would burn their own cities rather than let us take them. We had never fought an enemy that grew stronger the more we hurt them. He walked to the window and looked out at the peaceful Valorian cityscape. The humans have a saying, he said. They say that what does not kill you makes you stronger. We should have listened, because we tried to kill them and we failed. And now they are the strongest species in the known galaxy. Yura asked the question that everyone was thinking. Elder Valis, if humans are so dangerous, why are we at peace with them? The old veteran turned and looked at her with eyes that had seen too much death. Because they chose to let us live, he said. And that is perhaps the most frightening thing of all. Catherine returned to his seat and took a long drink of water. His hands were shaking slightly, and Yura noticed that some of the older academics in the room had gone pale. They remembered the war, even if they had not fought in it. You want to know about the human front, Catherine said. Then I will tell you about New Pittsburgh. This is the battle that broke me. This is the battle that taught me what humans really are. New Pittsburgh was a mining colony on a world called Henderson's Rock. It was named after the human who had discovered the planet, a prospector searching for rare metals. The colony had grown quickly, attracting miners and their families from across human space. By the time the Valorians arrived, nearly 200,000 people called it home. Kethran was a young commander then, leading his first major assault. His battalion numbered 15,000 soldiers, supported by artillery, aircraft, and orbital weapons. Intelligence reported that the colony was defended by approximately 2,000 human fighters, mostly miners with basic training. We expected the battle to last 2 days, Kethran said. It lasted 8 months. The Valorians landed outside the main city and began their advance. The humans did not meet them in open battle. Instead, they retreated into the mining tunnels that honeycombed the planet's crust. These tunnels stretched for thousands of kilometers, connecting mines, refineries, and underground settlements. We followed them into the tunnels, Kethran said. That was our first mistake. The darkness underground was absolute. Valorian eyes were adapted for bright sunlight, and the soldiers stumbled through passages they could barely see. The humans, who had worked these mines for years, knew every turn and every shadow. They attacked without warning, killed quickly, and vanished before the Valorians could respond. They would collapse tunnels on our columns, burying hundreds of soldiers alive. They would poison the air in certain passages, wait for us to die, and then take our weapons. They built traps using mining explosives that would kill 20 soldiers with a single blast. And they never stopped. Day and night for month after month, they kept fighting. Catherine described how the Valorian command tried everything to break the human resistance. They flooded tunnels with toxic gas. They used ground-penetrating bombs to collapse entire sections. They cut off food and water supplies. None of it worked. The humans simply moved deeper underground, recycled their air and water, and continued fighting. There was a human named Danny Cole, Catherine said. He had been a mining foreman before the war. He became the leader of the resistance, and he was the most dangerous enemy I have ever faced. He organized the tunnel fighters, coordinated attacks across hundreds of kilometers, and kept morale high even when his people were starving. Catherine met Danny Cole only once, during a failed negotiation attempt. The Valorian commanders had offered generous terms, surrender, and the colonists would be spared and resettled. Cole had laughed in their faces. He told us that New Pittsburgh was his home, Catherine said. He told us that his grandparents had built the first mine, and his children had been born in the underground settlements. He said that he would rather die in those tunnels than live as a slave on a Valorian colony world. And then he walked away, back into the darkness. The battle continued. Catherine lost half his battalion in the first 3 months. Replacements arrived, but they died just as quickly. The underground war was grinding the Valorian army into dust, one soldier at a time. There was one day that I will never forget, Catherine said, his voice growing quiet. We had received intelligence about a human medical facility hidden in the Eastern Tunnel Network. It was treating wounded fighters and sheltering civilians. My orders were to capture it intact and take prisoners for interrogation. Catherine's unit found the facility after 2 days of searching. It was a converted mining station filled with beds and medical equipment. There were about 50 people inside, doctors, patients, and a handful of guards. We surrounded the facility and demanded surrender. The humans had no chance. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped. A sane enemy would have given up. Instead, a woman named Lisa Grant stepped forward. She was a combat medic, trained to save lives, not take them. She was covered in blood from treating wounded soldiers, and she told Catherine that no one in the facility would surrender. I did not understand, Catherine said. I told her that resistance was pointless. I told her that her patients would be treated well as prisoners. I promised that no harm would come to them if they laid down their weapons. Lisa Grant smiled at him. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had already accepted death. She said that Valorian promises meant nothing. She said that her people would rather die free than live as slaves. And then she turned around and went back into the facility. What happened next still gave Catherine nightmares. They fought us with everything they had. The doctors used surgical tools as weapons. The patients, some of them missing limbs, fired rifles from their beds. An old man in a wheelchair threw himself at my soldiers with a knife in each hand. They knew they would die, and they did not care. They wanted to take as many of us with them as possible. In the chaos, Catherine noticed a young human male, barely more than a child. His name was Eddie Marsh, and he was 17 years old. He had lied about his age to join the resistance. Eddie was carrying something, Catherine said. It took me a moment to recognize it. It was a Valorian plasma core, stolen from one of our destroyed vehicles. The cores are unstable when damaged. They can explode with enough force to destroy a building. Eddie Marsh walked toward the Valorian soldiers. He was smiling. Someone was shouting at him to stop, to run, to get away. But he kept walking. I ordered my soldiers to shoot him. They did. He took 3 plasma bolts to the chest. And he kept walking. He was dead on his feet, but his body refused to fall. And then he pressed the trigger. The explosion killed Eddie Marsh, 40 Valorian soldiers, and destroyed the entire medical facility. It also collapsed the tunnel behind Kethran's unit, cutting off their retreat. By the time they dug themselves out, the surviving humans had escaped deeper into the mine network. A child, Kethran said. A 17-year-old child chose to kill himself to save his people. He smiled as he did it. He was happy to die. The old veteran looked at Yura with hollow eyes. Your species has a word for this. You call it bravery. We had no word for it. We had never seen anything like it. Creatures who would choose certain death over the possibility of survival were beyond our understanding. We called it insanity because we could not call it anything else. New Pittsburgh fell eventually. It took 8 months, 70,000 Valorian casualties, and the complete destruction of the tunnel network. When the last human defenders were finally cornered, they detonated the remaining mining explosives and brought the entire mountain down on themselves rather than be captured. We won the battle, Kethran said. But we lost something far more important. We lost the belief that we could win the war. The lecture hall had grown very quiet. Some of the younger students looked sick. Others were crying. Kethran understood. He had felt the same way when he first realized what humans were capable of. New Pittsburgh was not unique, he continued. Every human colony fought with the same ferocity. Every battle cost us more than we could afford. But the resistance was only part of the nightmare. The true horror was watching humans adapt. When the war began, humans were a primitive species by Valorian standards. Their ships were slow, their weapons were crude, and their technology was centuries behind the Dominion. The Valorian High Command believed that this gap would guarantee victory. They were wrong. Humans learn, Kethran said. They learn faster than any species we have ever encountered. They take things apart, figure out how they work, and then make them better. Our greatest technological advantages disappeared within years. He told them about Dr. Henry Price, a human scientist who had been captured during the early months of the war. Price was a xenobiologist, an expert in alien life forms. The Valorians had taken him to a research facility for interrogation, hoping to extract information about human biology and weaknesses. Instead, Dr. Price extracted information from us, Kethran said with bitter admiration. He spent 3 years in captivity, pretending to cooperate. He learned our language, studied our technology, and memorized everything he could about Valorian engineering. And then he escaped. The escape itself was remarkable. Price had built a radio transmitter from stolen medical equipment and contacted human resistance fighters. They launched a raid on the research facility, losing dozens of soldiers to rescue a single scientist. We did not understand why humans would sacrifice so many lives for one man, Kethran admitted. We learned the answer 6 months later, when human ships appeared with engines that were faster than ours. Dr. Price had not just learned about Valorian technology. He had improved it. His modifications to human fusion engines doubled their efficiency and tripled their speed. Suddenly, human ships could outrun Valorian pursuers. The war changed overnight. But Price was only the beginning. Humans took everything we threw at them and turned it into weapons against us. They captured our plasma rifles and built better versions. They studied our armor and found its weaknesses. They analyzed our tactics and developed counters. Every battle taught them something new. Kethran had been promoted to admiral by the 4th year of the war. It was not an honor. It was a necessity. Valorian officers were dying faster than they could be replaced, and anyone with combat experience was pushed into command roles. That was when I first heard about Captain Maria Santos, he said. The humans called her the Ghost. We called her the Nightmare. Maria Santos commanded a human warship called the Defiance. It was a converted cargo vessel, armed with stolen Valorian weapons and modified human missiles. By all rights, it should have been easy prey for Valorian cruisers. But Santos did not fight like we expected. She used the environment as a weapon. She would hide her ship in asteroid fields, using the rocks to mask her energy signature. She would dive into gas giant atmospheres, where our sensors could not follow. She would shut down all systems and drift like a dead Hulk until our patrols passed her by. Then she would strike. Santos specialized in attacking supply convoys and communication relays. She would appear from nowhere, destroy her targets in minutes, and vanish before reinforcements arrived. Over the course of 2 years, the Defiance destroyed more than 40 Valorian vessels. We sent entire fleets to hunt her, Kethran said. She escaped every time. We learned to fear her name. When our sensors detected the Defiance, crews would panic. I saw experienced officers freeze at their posts, too afraid to give orders. But Maria Santos was only one of many human commanders who terrorized Valorian forces. The war produced dozens of heroes who became legends among their people and monsters in Valorian nightmares. The worst was Colonel Ruth Adams, Kethran said. She commanded a unit called Fury Company. They specialized in boarding actions. Fury Company would target damaged or isolated Valorian ships. They would dock, force their way inside, and fight through the corridors until every Valorian aboard was dead. It was brutal, bloody work that required soldiers to face the enemy face to face. Humans have certain biological advantages in close combat, Kethran explained. They are endurance hunters, evolved to chase prey for hours until it collapses from exhaustion. Their bodies can absorb tremendous punishment and keep functioning. They have a chemical in their blood, adrenaline. That temporarily increases their strength and dulls their pain receptors. He had witnessed Colonel Adams in battle once, during a desperate defense of a Valorian supply station. Her company had bored through a hull breach, cutting through the outer doors with plasma torches. She was the first through the breach. My soldiers fired at her. They hit her 3 times with plasma bolts. She kept coming. She was burned and bleeding, and she was laughing. She killed 4 of my men before we could retreat to the intersections. Catherine's voice was hollow. She was laughing. She was dying, and she was happy about it, because she knew that her soldiers were behind her, and they would finish what she had started. Ruth Adams survived that battle, though the injuries forced her to retire from combat. Fury Company continued fighting under new leadership, and they never lost a boarding action for the rest of the war. We studied humans, Kethran said. We dissected their bodies, analyzed their psychology, and tried to understand what made them so dangerous. The scientists gave us reports full of biological data and chemical formulas. None of it helped. He looked around the lecture hall. Humans are dangerous not because of their bodies or their weapons. They are dangerous because they refuse to accept defeat. They will adapt to any situation, overcome any obstacle, and sacrifice anything to survive. They treated the war not as a conflict between nations, but as a fight for the survival of their species. And when a species fights for survival, it becomes something terrifying. Kethran paused. We realized too late that humans do not fight wars the way civilized species do. They do not fight to win territory or resources. They fight to make winning so costly that you wish you had never started. And by the time we understood this, it was already too late. The war was about to turn. The hunters were about to become the hunted. And Kethran Vollis was about to learn that human mercy could be even more frightening than human violence. The 7th year of the war began with a message that changed everything. Human ships appeared at the edge of Valorian space, not running or hiding, but advancing information. They were coming to the Dominion's homeworlds. The prey had become the predator. I remember the day the invasion fleet arrived at Desert Prime, Kethran said. I was commanding the defensive fleet, 300 ships tasked with protecting one of our core colony worlds. The human fleet was smaller, perhaps 200 vessels. We believed we had the advantage. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the Valorian fleet was destroyed. Kethran's flagship was crippled, and he was forced to abandon ship in an escape pod. He crashed on the surface of Desert Prime with a handful of survivors, watching from the ground as human dropships descended through the clouds. The humans did not bombard us from orbit, Kethran said. They could have. They had the weapons and the position. They could have reduced Desert Prime to ash without losing a single soldier. Instead, they landed ground forces. Yira interrupted. Why would they do that? It seems inefficient. Kethran nodded slowly. That is what we thought. We assumed they wanted slaves, as we had wanted them. Or perhaps they wanted to study us, to understand their enemies. We were wrong about that too. The human ground commander was General Jack Morrison, a veteran of a dozen campaigns. His forces swept across Desert Prime with terrifying efficiency, capturing cities and military installations within days. But they did not slaughter civilians. They did not enslave the population. They simply occupied the planet and waited. Morrison sent a message to the remaining Valorian defenders, Kethran said. It was very simple. He said, surrender and live. Fight and die. No third option. Most defenders surrendered. The war had broken Valorian morale years ago, and the soldiers knew they could not win. Only a few units continued to resist, hiding in forests and mountains as the humans had once done. Kethran was not among them. His injuries were severe, and he had no way to reach the remaining fighters. He hid in the wreckage of his escape pod, waiting to die or be captured. On the 3rd day, a human soldier found me. Her name was Lieutenant Amy Dunn. She was young, perhaps 25 by human counting, with brown hair and tired eyes. She carried a rifle and wore the patches of an infantry unit. Amy Dunn stood over Kethran's broken body and looked down at him. By all the rules of war as the Valorians understood them, she should have killed him. He was an enemy officer, wounded but still alive. He had commanded ships that had killed thousands of humans. He deserved no mercy. She knelt beside me, Kethran said, his voice thick with emotion. She opened her medical kit and began treating my wounds. She gave me water. She set my broken limbs. And when I asked her why, she said something I have never forgotten. The old veteran's eyes were wet. She said, "The war is almost over. And when it ends, we have to be able to live with what we have done. I am choosing to let you live with knowing that not all humans are monsters." Amy Dunn stayed with Kethran for 2 days, keeping him alive until rescue arrived. She shared her food with him. She protected him from other human soldiers who wanted revenge. She talked to him about her family, her home, her dreams for after the war. I asked her about the invasion, Kethran said. I asked her why the humans had not simply destroyed us from orbit. Why they were spending lives to conquer our worlds when they could have exterminated us from safety. Amy Dunn's answer was simple but profound. She said that genocide was not victory. She said that her people had fought this war to survive, not to become the monsters that had attacked them. She said that humans wanted peace, not extinction. They wanted to end the war, not end a species. Kethran was rescued on the 5th day. Amy Dunn gave him a communicator to contact Valorian relief ships, then disappeared into the chaos of the occupation. He never saw her again. I was taken to a prisoner camp, Kethran continued. I expected torture, interrogation, execution. Instead, I was given medical care, food, and a bed. The human guards were stern, but not cruel. They treated us as prisoners, not as animals. The war lasted 3 more months. High Counselor Vedas, the leader of the Valorian government, opened negotiations with General Morrison. The human terms were harsh: reparations, disarmament, territorial concessions. But they were not genocidal. The Valorians would survive as a species. They would keep their homeworld. They would eventually rebuild. I watched the peace treaty being signed from my hospital bed, Kethran said. I remember thinking that I should feel humiliated. We had been conquered, defeated, brought to our knees by a species we had once dismissed as primitive. But I did not feel humiliation. I felt relief. He paused. And something else. Something that I could not identify for many years. It was not until decades later that I understood what I was feeling. Yira leaned forward. What was it? Respect, Catherine said. And fear. Not fear of human weapons or human soldiers. Fear of human choice. They had every reason to destroy us. We had invaded their worlds, killed their people, tried to enslave them. They could have repaid us 1,000 times over. Instead, they chose mercy. He looked at Yira with eyes that had seen too much. Monsters are easy to understand. They kill because they must. They destroy because it is their nature. You can predict them, prepare for them, defend against them. But creatures who can choose between mercy and violence, who can hold the power of gods and choose not to use it, they are something else entirely. Catherine's claws scraped against the table. Amy Dunn could have killed me. She had every right. I was her enemy. I had killed her people. But she chose to save me instead. And that choice has haunted me for 47 years. Because if humans can choose mercy when they have every reason for revenge, what else can they choose? What are they capable of, these creatures who master their own nature? The lecture hall was silent. That is the true lesson of the human front, Kethran said. It is not that humans are dangerous in war. It is that humans are dangerous because they can decide what kind of species they want to be. They can choose violence or peace, cruelty or kindness, destruction or creation. And you will never know which one they will choose until it is already happening. Catherine Vallis finished his water and looked around the lecture hall. The room was packed now. Word had spread across the campus, and students and professors had crowded in to hear the old veteran speak. Some were recording his words. Others were simply listening, their faces pale with shock. I have told you about battles and soldiers, Kethran said. I have told you about human violence and human mercy. But you came here to understand the war, and the war was about more than individual stories. It was about what our species learned, and what that learning cost us. He stood and walked slowly to the center of the room. His movements were painful, his joints stiff with age, but his voice remained strong. Before the war, the Valorian Dominion had conquered 37 species. We believed that expansion was our destiny, that weaker species existed to serve the strong. We had built an empire on this belief, and we saw no reason to question it. He looked at the young faces watching him. Humans taught us that we were wrong, not through arguments or philosophy, but through blood and fire. They showed us that a species does not have to be stronger or smarter or more advanced to be dangerous. A species only has to be willing to fight until the last individual is dead. Kethran returned to his seat. After the war, the Valorian military academies changed their curriculum. They added a new required course, human psychology. Every officer in our fleet must now study human history, culture, and behavior. The core lesson of this course is simple. Never engage an enemy who would rather die than surrender. Yira raised her hand. Has there been any conflict with humans since the peace treaty? No, Catherine said. And there never will be if our leaders are wise. The treaty included provisions for trade, cultural exchange, and mutual defense. We are now allies, bound together by agreements that neither side wishes to break. He paused. But the alliance is not based on friendship or trust. It is based on fear. We fear what humans would do if we ever threatened them again. They fear what we might become if we ever rebuilt our empire. We keep the peace because the alternative is too terrible to imagine. The lecture hall doors opened and a new figure entered. She was human, middle-aged, with graying brown hair and sharp eyes. She wore the formal robes of a diplomatic ambassador, and she moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades navigating political waters. Catherine recognized her immediately. His old heart began to pound. "Ambassador Grace Cooper," he said. "I was not expecting you." The human woman smiled. "I heard you were speaking today, Elder Wallace. I wanted to hear your testimony for myself." She walked to the front of the room and stood beside Catherine. The students watched in confused silence. A human ambassador at a Valorian academic lecture was unusual, but the tension between her and the old veteran suggested something more. "My grandmother spoke about you," Grace Cooper said. "She wondered for many years whether you had survived the war." Catherine's breath caught in his throat. "Your grandmother?" "Lieutenant Amy Dunn," Grace said. "She passed away 12 years ago. But before she died, she told me about the Valorian officer she had saved on Nesser Prime. She said that she hoped he had found peace." The lecture hall was absolutely silent. Catherine's hands trembled. "I have thought about her every day since the war. I have wondered what happened to her, whether she survived, whether she ever regretted showing mercy to an enemy." Grace Cooper shook her head. She never regretted it. She said that saving you was one of the best decisions she ever made. She said it reminded her that even in war, we can choose to be human. The old veteran bowed his head. Tears were flowing freely down his scarred face. "I do not deserve her kindness," he said. "I killed so many of her people. I followed orders that brought death to human worlds. I was her enemy." "You were a soldier," Grace said gently. "You did what you believed was right for your people. So did she. The difference is that she chose to see you as a person, not just an enemy. And that choice changed you, didn't it?" Catherine nodded slowly. "It changed everything. After the war, I spent decades working for peace between our species. I testified at war crimes tribunals, speaking honestly about what we had done. I advocated for the cultural exchange programs that brought our peoples together. I dedicated my life to ensuring that no future generation would have to experience what we experienced." He looked at Grace Cooper with something like wonder. "I did all of this because of her. Because Amy Dunn showed me that humans were capable of more than violence. Because she proved that mercy was possible, even in the darkest moments. I have spent 47 years trying to be worthy of the gift she gave me." Grace Cooper placed her hand on Catherine's shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of half a century. "She would be proud of you," she said. "She always believed that peace was possible. She believed that former enemies could become friends. And she was right." Catherine turned to face Yura and the assembled students. "This is the final lesson I can teach you," he said. "Humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy. They can adapt to any challenge, endure any hardship, and fight with a ferocity that defies understanding. But they are also capable of tremendous kindness, generosity, and forgiveness. They can choose to destroy, and they can choose to heal." He gestured to Grace Cooper. Her grandmother chose to heal. She chose to save an enemy when she had every reason to kill him. And that choice echoes through the generations. It brought her granddaughter here today to stand beside me and prove that peace is possible. The old veteran took a deep breath. "If you remember nothing else from my testimony, Remember this. Humans are dangerous not because they are cruel, but because they choose when to be cruel and when to be kind. And you will never know which one you are facing until it is too late. The only way to survive is to give them no reason to choose cruelty. The only way to thrive is to give them every reason to choose kindness. He looked at Grace Cooper, and for the first time in 47 years, he smiled. They are monsters and angels, destroyers and creators, soldiers and healers. They are human, and we are fortunate that they have chosen to be our friends. The lecture hall erupted in applause. Valorians and humans alike stood together, celebrating a message of hope and reconciliation. Catherine Wallace, the old veteran who had seen the worst of both species, stood at the center of it all. He had spent his life carrying the burden of war. But today, at last, he felt that burden begin to lift. The humans had taught him to fear. Amy Dunn had taught him to hope. And Grace Cooper had shown him that hope could endure across generations. The war was over. The peace was holding. And the future, for the first time in decades, looked bright.